Hello and welcome. My name is Olivia Ryan Hill, and I produce the conference programmes for the Vehicle Electrification Expo and Battery Cells and Systems shows. These pivotal events are focused on delivering automotive electrification in the UK and internationally, and are brought to you by the team at Event Partners. I'm delighted to introduce one of our key conference speakers, David Hudson, who's joining me in conversation about some of the major trends in battery and EV design. David is Head of Vehicle and Powertrain Engineering at Tata Motors and has previously worked at Jaguar, wearing multiple technical hats in the industry both in the UK and in India.
Yeah. I mean, part of what you've just mentioned there leads me on to another question, which is around emerging economies, where you have countries like India that perhaps have a little bit less infrastructure or can be a bit, I don't know, perhaps you could tell me if there's lessons to be learned from what they are doing or looking to do versus what is happening in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my recent experience has been very heavily focused on India. It's not an untypical market if you consider Southeast Asia generally. These are markets where one of the major outlets for passenger vehicles, passenger cars, is into the taxi segment, into the shared mobility segment, if you like, where there are normal small hatchbacks being used as taxis. It's not like a London situation where you have a very rigidly regulated world of hackney carriages, and that means that those markets get split into the private users of the cars who are doing relatively low mileages, as you suggested, and commercial users of those same vehicles who are expecting, the engineering of the vehicle is staying the same, but their use pattern can be, 200 kilometres a day, not 40 kilometres a day. So those guys, of course, are looking at electrification from two directions. One is it's got a massive opportunity to reduce their operating costs. So that means either more profit or cheaper rides for people. So both laudable goals. But the other one is that they need to have their range anxiety fear is a much more real one, because if they get stuck without charge and they've got a vehicle that's quite slow to recharge, they could be off the clock for a long time, perhaps some peak time of the day or when they've got a particularly urgent job to do. So there is a balance to be struck. But again, those guys often are working on fixed routes. They are working on return to base type operations. So great opportunity for high utilization, perhaps fast chargers, to be used by a fleet of vehicles that are always coming in, perhaps charging for an hour and then going out again for another 8 hours. So, we think there are plenty of opportunities for shared mobility type services to use electric vehicles, and I think that experience is coming into much more relevance around the world. We've seen Uber, for example, bringing fleets of Chinese EVs into the UK in order to give their drivers an option to drive electric. And there's now a lot of emphasis placed on whether the miles that you're doing on shared mobility services are green or not green. So huge opportunities that are being showcased in the emerging markets, but are equally very relevant to more developed EV markets too.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting what you're saying there with regards to the shared mobility system and the ideals that are growing in different speeds around the world, because obviously, we have COVID-19 at the moment and people are being encouraged away from public transport and shared mobility. So I'd be interested to know your thoughts on whether you think the sharing economy is as likely now, what the alternatives are, or has COVID, had a real impact on that and where it might go?
Yeah. And that's interesting, because the scenario I've just talked about, the use of fairly small vehicles as taxi fleets, typically when you see those vehicles in use, although they are privately used, they're generally fairly well occupied. It's not like a typical London cab where you might see one or, if you're really lucky, two people in the back of a black cab. You'll often see 4 or 5 people sharing a small hatchback. And that means that they are most definitely not socially distancing, and keeping those vehicles safely in service with the rules that we're currently working with around the world world, which, you know, they may last, they may not last. I think we're beginning to see these recurrences of virus outbreaks that suggest we're not being careful enough yet. So that is certainly driving a different level of interest into the EV market. In particular, we're starting to see urban mobility and by private vehicle all of a sudden becoming popular again. And you know, we've all heard the statistics about how few of the, you know, the younger generation of potential car buyers don't even have driving licenses anymore. You know, people who are you know, get well into their 20s, surviving because they're urban dwellers. They survive without driving because they don't need to. We're now seeing those same people, and I think there have been a few surveys published over the last couple of months that actually say that the number of those previously excluded car buyers who have taken themselves out of contention as being car buyers are now actually saying, no, we would think about buying a car now. And of course, high on their list of purchasing criteria is, you know, low carbon, low emissions vehicles, because many of them live in cities that have got regulation, like, you know, like London, for example. And so all of a sudden there is demand from a group of people who've never actually considered buying a car before, who've now got a very specific set of requirements. And it is all about urban mobility, so typically small cars. It's about low running costs, and it's about low purchase costs because it's a new budget item for them. They hadn't previously bought them. Plus the, you know, reversal of government policy that's had to take place of trying to drive people off shared public transport systems, you know, not willingly, but by force. And, you know, we hear stories about the capacity of things like, you know, the London bus system or the tube system being reduced by 60%, 70%. You can't move all the people if you have that sort of thing. So you have to depend on some other transport medium coming in. Now, yes, some of that will be unconventional EVs. You know, it'll be the you know, the electric scooter market and all these other slightly worrying things. They all need batteries. You know, don't get me wrong, but also it'll mean that people will be quite keen to buy small cars that are relatively low cost. And you know, VW, for example, is already reporting a lot of interest in their smallest EVs, not their brand new ID range, but the E-Up and its siblings in their family, which are, you know, sort of £20,000 EVs with a range that's only in the range, you know, 150, 200 mile range. So very interesting. The other story, and you know, we've started to get the this generation of shared mobility, autonomous shuttles, for example, have started to come around. You know, we've got a number of cities in Europe where these have been trialled, a number of quite promising looking technical solutions, but it's raised the question that if you don't want to put, you know, 60 or 70 people into a bus and share space, do you really want a small, you know, 4-meter footprint, highly dense urban pod, you know, which maybe have 8 or 10 people in it? Is that just as bad a solution, especially when the maximum speed of those vehicles is quite low, so you don't get anywhere very fast? And it's very difficult to keep sort of safe air quality environment in those vehicles if you've got virus transmission to consider. So all of those factors are starting to disrupt the engineering assumptions we're making about what kind of cars or car-like vehicles are needed out in the market.